Hi guys, welcome back to Tidal Gardens. I want to talk about the dreaded brown jelly disease. If you have no idea what brown jelly disease is, ignorance is bliss because dealing with it is one of the more unfun parts of the hobby. If you're in reef keeping long enough, you will likely encounter it at some point, so pull up a chair. In this video, I'll cover what brown jelly is, why it's so bad, what are the possible causes, and finally how to go about treating it. Real quick, this video is sponsored by Polyp Lab. We will be talking about their Coral Dip Reef Primer later, but without further ado, let's dive into what brown jelly even is. In short, brown jelly is a very fast-acting tissue necrosis that pretty much looks exactly like its namesake. The affected coral will disintegrate into this goopy brown mass, and normally within 24 to 48 hours, it's going to be completely dead. It acts so fast, in fact, that the unaffected parts of the coral may look completely healthy. Perfect coloration, polyps fully extended, but that is short-lived because like a wildfire, that brown jelly spreads and the whole colony is overtaken. Fast forward a couple days and you are left with a pristine white skeleton. So again, what is brown jelly really? That is a trickier question to answer, as it may not be a single thing, but a collection of things gone wrong. Basically, there was some kind of triggering event or a combination of factors, and the coral's microbiome revolts and becomes pathogenic. All these random microbes can live in perfect harmony for years, and then suddenly they get the order that they need to eat the coral to survive. And they do that with the quickness. At that point, opportunistic microbes like ciliates descend on the dying tissue like vultures to accelerate the destruction. While the actual quote-unquote disease might be made up of a vast array of microbes, one of the signature organisms that are seemingly always present in this style of tissue necrosis are these oblong ciliates. They seem to be the largest thing in the mix and are likely the ones doing most of the damage to the tissue. I call it just tissue at that point because even though it is still roughly in the shape of a coral, make no mistake, there is no coral left. Under microscopy, it is just a teeming mass of ciliates, bacteria, loose zooxanthellae, and other slime basically holding it all together. Besides being gross, brown jelly disease is a major concern for two main reasons. First, it is incredibly fast moving. It is not one of those things that you can just deal with at your own leisure or whenever you can get to it. If you're seeing the start of this type of necrosis, your window of opportunity to treat the coral is very narrow. A coral affected with brown jelly disease often does not survive more than a couple days. The second reason brown jelly is so worrisome is how easily it spreads. It's highly virulent. It is transmissible by contact to other corals nearby, which is a much greater risk to densely packed aquariums or farming systems. It may start as a microbial imbalance in one specimen, but once that blob gets going, it has no issue transferring to a completely healthy adjacent coral and continuing its rampage. So, what causes this? The prevailing thought in the industry is that brown jelly disease is a tragic symptom rather than the root cause. The canon event that leads to brown jelly can be hard to pin down because it could be a multitude of factors that together turn previously docile microbes into killers. In that sense, any sudden change could be a factor. Not very helpful, I know. Regardless, here are some of the possibilities. Things that are going to affect microbial growth. Factors that can throw off the native microbiome could be a major cause. On the growth side, we have things like rising temperature. It is strongly correlated to bacterial growth. Here at Tidal Gardens, when it gets cooking hot outside, it is difficult for us to keep some of our tanks under 80 degrees, and we definitely notice an uptick in microbial growth. Similarly, elevated dissolved organic carbon, think carbon dosing, it feeds bacterial population growth. If your tank is creeping up in DOCs, you might also be at a greater risk of a brown jelly event. it might be a good idea to occasionally siphon up those piles of detritus you see accumulating. Just saying. On the microbial reduction side, we have all manner of dips and full tank treatments. Don't get me wrong. These are wonderful problem solving tools, but it is possible that the tool is too aggressive and it leads to a destabilization of a coral's microbiome. The more aggressive or non-specific the treatment, the greater risk of collateral damage. I will give just one example real quick. Fluconazole. It is commonly used to knock down problematic algae such as bryopsis. In the past, we've used it to control ulva. Thing is, fluconazole works by inhibiting a very specific enzyme. But that enzyme is not just in algae. Versions of that enzyme are in fungus, plants, bacteria, and animals as well. So, in an attempt to knock out bryopsis, you may have just killed off all kinds of stuff and caused an imbalance. Stress is another thing. An acute stress event could turn your coral into a beacon for pathogenic bacteria. Whether it be physical or chemical stress, it can cause the coral to produce more dimethylsulfonopropionate, or DMSP, as a form of protection. Some of that DMSP leaks out into the water. Pathogenic bacteria such as Vibrio can easily detect DMSP, causing them to activate and swim towards the stressed coral. There is a universe of possibilities why a coral might be stressed. Physical trauma. Maybe a fish is getting too nibbly. Maybe the coral has an angry coral neighbor and they're doing battle. Maybe your hands are in the tank too often. Nobody really likes to talk about it, but you might have a pest issue. And if you have some flatworms munching on your coral, that'll do it. It could even be more subtle, like you have tons of coral growth, and that results in suboptimal flow over time. That lack of water flow could definitely cause some dead spots. Similarly, lack of light because a portion of that coral shades itself and other corals below it. So in a way, that's kind of like drowning in your own success. And then boom, brown jelly. All of these possible causes goes back to the recommendations experienced hobbyists have given for ages. Stability is key. It is not easy to achieve, though, given that a reef aquarium is a dynamic ecosystem, but the better job that one does at keeping the system stable, it will be more resilient to brown jelly and many other issues. Let's talk about treatments. So what should you do if you see a brown jelly infection? First up, we're going to want to remove it from the tank. But before we do that, I want to siphon out as much of it as possible so I don't spread brown jelly just trying to remove the coral. When removing the affected colony, use a container to scoop it out all at once so the jelly doesn't pull off as you're taking the coral out of the water. Also, definitely don't shake it. It is so tempting to do and really satisfying, but no, that's going to spread the disease big time. Once out of the tank, I like to give it a dip in either reef primer, a potassium salt-based dip, or hydrogen peroxide, an oxidative agent, depending on the coral. They both work really well, but if you're dipping more delicate corals such as Acropora, I would use just the reef primer, and that's not because they're the sponsor of this video. It is way more gentle on delicate corals like SPS. I've got two Acropora here that have spread brown jelly to one another. I want to show you real quick that both of these treatments do work. Let's first take a look at the effectiveness of reef primer on the brown jelly. The concentration I use is 45 grams of reef primer into 1 gallon of tank water. Under microscopy, you can really see it go to work. Almost immediately, the microbes first slow their movement and act kind of erratically. After a few minutes, they stop and rupture. This is in a 5-minute dip. Next up, let's take a look at hydrogen peroxide. The concentration that I'm using is 20 mLs of a 3% hydrogen peroxide solution into 1 gallon of tank water. This is also super effective. Again, I'm only dipping it for 5 minutes. Normally, I would not dip Acropora in hydrogen peroxide at all, but honestly, I was feeling just a little bit experimental with this. It's always a bit risky dipping in hydrogen peroxide because some corals handle it a lot better than others. I have done some freak out concentrations of hydrogen peroxide on corals that I knew could tolerate it, like hammers and torches. Those LPS look super stressed immediately afterwards, but the next day look absolutely incredible. Let's see how these Acropora handled it. Again, the standard practice here at the coral farm is to use a potassium salt-based dip and only break out hydrogen peroxide on corals that we are very comfortable with. Once the dipping is done, I return the corals to the tank. Unfortunately, the one dipped in hydrogen peroxide did not survive. It was the strawberry shortcake, which, to be fair to the hydrogen peroxide dip, had the worst infection. The voodoo magic Acropora, however, did survive and the brown jelly stopped. 1 out of 2 in this case, not too bad. Had I not dipped these corals at all, I'm pretty certain that they both would have died overnight. Just to be clear, this was not meant to be a comparison between reef primer and hydrogen peroxide. It is not an experiment. There is not a control. I really wanted just to show that both did kill the brown jelly under microscopy. One optional step in this that you can try on branching coral specifically is to cut the dying parts of the coral while in that dipping process and then re-glue the healthy parts. I didn't do it in this particular example, but that can help isolate the infection. The last step is to continue to monitor the tank and make sure that none of the treated corals and none of the other corals shows signs of brown jelly. Anyways, guys, that does it for this topic. Hope you never have to deal with it, but just in case, have some dip on hand and be proactive. Until next time, happy reefing.